So welcome back. Now we're going to talk about the Renaissance and the colonial era. Two main ideas with regards to attitudes around business arose during the Renaissance. The first one is one that I mentioned briefly before, and I'm not a big fan of, is the Protestant ethic. And now this is really more coined by Max Weber. Much later, it was this kind of attitude that sprung up during that time. And so the Protestant ethic was quite different from that of the medieval Catholic Church in that certain kinds of business-oriented values like thrift and saving and sobriety were signs of God's favor. So being wealthy was a sign that God liked you, not a sign that you were actually greedy. Okay? And in many ways, Max Weber, quite a couple hundred years after this came about, believed that it was this Protestant work ethic that was the reason that Northern Europe was so much more prosperous than the Southern European countries, and he attributed this largely to religious differences between Protestants and Catholics. Again, I'm not sure that that's true. There's also something going on in Northern Europe, which is a respect for private property that also didn't really exist in Southern Europe, that I personally believe had more to do with Northern Europe's success than did any sort of a religious difference. And then, of course, another idea sprung up was capitalism. And capitalism basically says that free markets should be harnessed for the public good, and they can protect consumers from abuse. So as during the Renaissance period, you start to see also the birth of capital markets. There starts to be more and more wealth creation. Certain economies are growing. I mentioned, and I've mentioned a few times, the British corporations, so individuals would pool their money together for the purposes of investing. And of course, also during the Renaissance period, you see the very, very early seeds of the Industrial Revolution. Now, we're going to transition a little bit to the Colonial Period. So, I forgot to go right up here. This is the Renaissance. This is the Colonial Period. So, Colonial Period. Now, the colonists that landed at both Jamestown and Plymouth were not really there for altruistic reasons. The colonists from the Jamestown colony were backed by the London Company, or also known as the Jamestown Company. These were investors who put those people on a ship, financed their voyage in the hopes that those individuals would send back raw materials and the investors could make a profit. It was the same thing with the Plymouth Company, who financed the Pilgrims. They didn't send them because they felt sorry for them for religious persecution or anything like that. They sent them to the New World so they could send back raw materials and those investors could make a profit. This is another great example of the British corporation. Now, because of these corporations arising, starting in Britain, the amount of trade in areas near near the ocean or on coastal regions greatly expanded. And in the U.S., farmers moving inland also helped to create a broad agrarian base for the economy. And kind of about this time, another major shift in attitudes towards business starts happening in the U.S., and that was that Ben Franklin professed that business activity was synonymous with traditional virtues, and therefore is not something that we should view with any sort of moral suspicion. Now, of course, after the American Revolution, American businesses continued to expand. And you had two conflicting viewpoints, that of Thomas Jefferson and then the other of Alexander Hamilton. Thomas Jefferson thought that industrial growth was something kind of negative and that there should be an agrarian economy of landowning farmers. And that was the best way to achieve social order. So the new nation should be a nation of farmers. Alexander Hamilton, on the other hand, thought that industrial growth was the key to national power, and that manufacturing and finance in the coastal areas of the new America should be promoted. So at this time, we just talked about the Renaissance and the Colonial Period. Now we're going to start talking about the 1800s. I'll see you then.